It's no surprise by this point that a new Naughty Dog game has come along and set yet another benchmark for visual fidelity in games. And the fact that The Last of Us Part 2 does it on hardware that was outdated even when it launched 7 years ago makes it that much more impressive. In true Naughty Dog fashion, the game is also brimming with tiny little details that come together to bring its world and characters to life in truly incredible fashion. And here in this feature, that's what we will be talking about. Blood in the Snow. Ellie spends a good 2 or more hours in the densely snow-covered region of Jackson, Wyoming when the game begins, and The Last of Us Part 2 does some really cool stuff with that environment. For instance, when you kill enemies and they fall dead to the ground, if you pay close attention, you'll be able to see the hot blood pooling out of their corpses, melting the snow around them. Shooting TV screens. You may have not tried this, given that ammo conservation is key in The Last of Us Part 2, but should you decide to waste a couple of bullets to shoot at one of the many TV screens you find in the environment, you'll see some impressive destruction. Rather than just triggering an animation that destroys the whole screen, you'll see localized damage around the point of impact. Broken glass. There's plenty of glass breaking going on in The Last of Us Part 2, which is also impressive for multiple reasons. For starters, similar to the TV screens, glass also shatters in different ways depending on what you hit or shoot it with. Meanwhile, when Ellie walks on broken glass, you can hear it crunching beneath her feet. Guitars. The guitar is a motif that turns up again and again in The Last of Us Part 2 and central to Ellie and Joel's relationship. But it's not just a recurring story beat, it's also a recurring minigame. What's noticeable is that the finger movements and placements of the characters while playing the guitar during the minigame and the cutscenes are all perfectly accurate to the best of our knowledge at least. Talk about attention to detail. Playing the guitars. Something else that's impressive to see with the guitars is just how good they look. We're pretty sure Naughty Dog obsessed over recreating these models for a long time. Every guitar looks incredible, from the way the light bounces off their surface to the tiny little imperfections like dents and scuff marks to the way their strings vibrate. Blood spatter. Here's a pretty big understatement. The Last of Us Part 2 is a pretty violent game. There's a lot of blood and gore to go around, but sometimes those macabre sides can be quite impressive from a technical standpoint. When enemies get shot or get caught in explosions, their blood splatters outward in realistic ways and sticks to the walls and floors around them. There's also excellent instances of body disintegration. Shoot an enemy with a shotgun at point blank range, and you can see chunks of viscera and bits of their limbs flying out. It's disturbing and oddly gratifying at the same time. Stalkers. Stalkers really shine in The Last of Us Part 2 and have a much stronger and more terrifying identity than they did in the first game. They're also relentless in their pursuit of you. For instance, if by some means you manage to blow their legs off, they'll continue to come after you by dragging their legless torsos toward you with their decaying hands. They're very Resident Evil, actually. Ropes. One of the things Ellie can do, thanks to being a more nimble, playable protagonist than Joel, is use ropes to climb up to ledges and swing across gaps. Everything to do with these ropes, or cables, which is what they usually are, is really cool. Their physics are realistic, and you can mess about with them in the environments you find yourselves in for minutes on end. When you move around with these ropes, Ellie even winds them up with really good animations, which is a detail that was by no means necessary, but one we really appreciate nonetheless. Workbenches. If you need to be convinced of the quality of animations in The Last of Us Part 2 in 10 seconds or less, just watch a short clip of weapons being upgraded on a workbench. The animations here are absolutely insane, from the way Ellie pulls out her guns, to the way she empties the chamber before she gets to work on them, to the way she adds components to them, to how she cleans them after the work is done. Snow-covered trees. Let's talk about the snow in Jackson once again. Snow deformation is something we find ourselves obsessing over in games for some reason, and The Last of Us Part 2 has really good snow deformation as well. In fact, in some areas, it even goes above and beyond. For instance, if Ellie happens to brush her shoulders against a high tree branch while riding her horse by it, the branch shudders slightly and the snow on top of it slides off onto the ground. Blizzards. A particular section early on in the game sees Ellie getting caught in a blizzard, and the details and the weather effects here are really something to see. From the way the harsh winds blow up the snow, to how Ellie's hair and her horse's tail whips around, it's the kind of attention to detail you don't often see in games. Rainfall. Snow isn't the only extreme weather we see in The Last of Us Part 2. The decrepit streets of Seattle are often drenched in heavy rains in the middle of thunderstorms, and these too are gorgeous in a very ominous way. The way forks of lightning split the heavy cloud cover, the way rain aggressively falls in visible sheets against the harsh window, it's really something to behold. The notes. We can do an entire feature dedicated to how good the notes you find in The Last of Us Part 2 are, but here, let's focus on something very specific. Every single note you find in the game has different handwriting. They were all written by different people, so of course they have different handwriting, but it's hard to think of games that pay this much attention to such a minute detail. The map. Upon entering Seattle for the first couple of hours, players are let loose in a semi-open world environment. The map you make use of in this area isn't your typical video game map. If you played The Lost Legacy, it's a lot like that. Ellie manually marks locations on the map when she comes across them in the area herself, and on top of that, once you've collected all that can be collected in a given location, she manually crosses out those locations on the map as well. Looking into the light. Sources of light can often come as safe havens in the many dark corners and corridors of The Last of Us Part 2's world, but if you look directly at one of them, Joel will react in a realistic fashion. Look directly at bright lights or the sun and you will see Joel shielding his eyes. The zippers on Ellie's bag. Take a look at Ellie's bag at basically any point during gameplay and you'll notice some really tiny, incredible details. More specifically, you will see the zippers on her bag bouncing lightly when she's walking, wildly when she's running, and erratically when she's riding a horse. Only Naughty Dog would go to such lengths to animate something most people might not even notice. Particle effects. The Last of Us Part 2 has some truly incredible particle effects, and they really have their time to shine anytime you enter a room or area infested with spores. You can visibly see every single spore floating in the dead air of these rooms, and what adds even more atmosphere to these areas is tiny little details like the spores moving and reacting to slight currents of wind when you open or close a door. The safes. You'll find plenty of safes lying around in The Last of Us Part 2, holding the promise of valuable resources and ammo. Each of these will be locked, of course, but you don't actually have to go looking for the combinations to open them. You can simply listen to the tumblers clicking into place and open every single safe in the game that way. So put your headphones on and get cracking. Reacting to gunshots. While most games see the playable character reacting to gunshots in fairly ordinary ways, grunting in pain or taking a step back in recoil, often in The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie has very real reactions to being shot. Often you'll see her getting completely knocked back and down onto the ground when shot at close range, after which she remains on the ground for a couple of seconds. Knife to the throat. There's a lot of throat slitting and stabbing going on in The Last of Us Part 2, and if for some reason you pay close attention to what's happening on the screen at these times, you'll see some really impressive little details. There's even a very particular cutscene in the game that shows this up close. When a knife's tip is pressed against someone's throat, you can see the skin around the tip react to it with slight depressions, and often even droplets of blood.
And that wraps it up. If you like what we are doing, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon. That way you will never miss out on any of our videos.